Welcome to the Human Reboot with me, Emma Last. We have uplifting, inspiring, and diverse reboot stories from people sharing the courageous, honest, authentic, and sometimes difficult life lessons. The Human Reboot will provide proven mentally flourishing formulas and practical tips to help you to live life to the full, giving you direction and hope. Make your mental fitness and well-being a daily priority. Learn to pause so that you can get clear and perform at your best. Switch off to switch on. It's time for your Human Reboot. Today on the Human Reboot, we have the very brilliant Jenny Gordon from Genuine Consulting. Jenny is a Myers Briggs practitioner and people developer, specialising in leadership, team effectiveness, communication, and self-awareness. And she helps people to rediscover, reconnect, and reclaim their brilliance. Jenny, please, would you tell us a little bit about your mission?
Hello, Emma. I'm delighted to be here. I am on a mission to rid the world of that horrible soul shriveling disease, comparisonitis, one conversation at a time.
Oh, brilliant. And why is that disease so terrible?
It's that an itis, as opposed to an ology, an itis is an inflammation caused by a harmful external source. And the external source in this case is comparing ourselves with other people. And the reason it's so damaging is because it makes us feel less than. It is a component of that well-known imposter syndrome. It makes us feel not good enough. It just sets up this horrible shriveling and burying of our brilliance. And it gets worse, I think, with every generation.
Yes, affecting our mental health, well-being, and overall confidence, usually, I would say.
Absolutely. And our resilience, our ability to kind of, pick ourselves up and reboot.
So now you've just led me beautifully into the reboot. Would you mind sharing your reboot with us, please?
Absolutely. I'd be delighted. I'm going to tell it like a story. So I'm going to say, sit back. Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. I want you to imagine a rugged Scottish coastline, a tiny fishing village high on a cliff. There's a pretty cottage, and inside the cottage sitting room, with beautiful windows that make the most of the fabulous views, a woman sat on the floor weeping. That woman was me. I was about to lose my home, about to have no job, and 23 years of marriage lying beside me in tiny, broken, jagged pieces. This wasn't the life I'd imagined, and certainly not where I expected to find myself. I was lost, and any brilliance I may have had was buried very, very deep inside. I was a successful health professional. I worked as a clinical paediatric nurse specialist running my own clinic. I'd recently been awarded a prestigious research fellowship by the Scottish Government that was allowing me to undertake my PhD. I had 3 fabulous teenage sons, a husband, a wide circle of friends, an active social life, and I lived in a beautiful part of the world. It felt like I had it all. So what do you do when your world, the life as you know it, falls to pieces? Well, what I did was to carry on pretending that everything was still okay. I had to keep going for my children, and I had to keep going for myself. I went to see my supervisor at the university to ask if I could suspend my studies while I sorted myself out. And she said no, saying that I needed a reason to get up in the morning, to give myself something to focus on. She said, "You won't thank me now, but you will later. Focus on those simple tasks that you need to do, the ones that you don't really have to think about, because they will provide you with a framework and a structure to hang on to in the darkest of times." She was so right. I absolutely didn't thank her then. I thought she had just added even more weight to my very heavy burden. But over time, I realised that actually she'd really helped me on concentrating on the things that I could do. The other person who was really helpful was my fabulous solicitor. And he gave me a piece of free advice, actually the best piece of free advice ever. He said that I wouldn't be able to protect my sons from the situation. And my immediate response was, well, yes, I can. Of course I can. That's my job. I am their mother. Well, actually, he was also right. It isn't possible to protect our children from a situation that they are a part of. And so we made a pact to get through it together. We agreed that although this was something that we hadn't planned or had any experience of, we'd work through it together. And that the most important thing was talking to each other, having a place, having a safe space where we could say how we were feeling, and most importantly, to know that we would get through it together, whatever happened. I applied for and I got a new job down south, and I started again. It wasn't an easy road back to Brilliance because I really didn't know who I was or how to ask for help or what I really wanted. But gradually, over time, I invested in a coach. I invested in some learning. That's when I first started doing Myers Briggs. And I remember waking up one morning in my tiny little Oxford flat. And I was experiencing this really unfamiliar feeling. And I kind of lay there a bit and, sat with it. And I realized that what I was feeling was actually happiness. To say that I was surprised about that was a real understatement. And guess what? The next day it happened again, and it came back on a regular basis. And that's when I realized that even the darkest, most horrible times are transient. We can get out the other side, even when it feels like somebody keeps moving the end of the tunnel. I had that conversation with my dad a few times, but I did get out of the tunnel and back into the daylight.
Oh, and so you're still settled in Oxfordshire, aren't you now?
I am, yes. I don't live in my tiny flat anymore. That was a rented flat. And I eventually bought a little house just outside Oxford and created a new life.
Fabulous. So you mentioned in your reboot that that was your kind of first experience of when you first experienced Myers Briggs. Would you tell me a little bit more about that? Because I expect in kind of the healthcare field, you probably hadn't really experienced many of those personality type kind of assessments before.
No, absolutely not. None at all. And my first introduction to Myers Briggs was, as so often happens, was like a team building kind of afternoon. So it was a kind of how can we keep them occupied and give them something a bit different to do after we'd ploughed through policies and protocols and all of that kind of normal stuff. And so it was an opportunity to just have a play, really. And I was just fascinated by A, how accurate it was, and B, the potential power of it.
So, what impact has that had on you, and how has it shaped what you've gone on to do?
I went on to do my Myers Briggs training as a practitioner. I also started doing coaching, and I suppose the impact it had was this deep understanding of how different we all are, and that it's very easy to assume that everybody's the same as us. We all have a view of the world, and we start with our own lens, if you like. So we're standing on our side of the street, and that's how we see the world. And there's a sort of unwritten assumption that most of us have, is that everybody else sees the world in the same way that we do, partly because that would make it really easy. And secondly, I realized that things that irritated me in other people, and probably how I irritated other people, was largely because they have different preferences to me, and that an understanding of those preferences actually takes away a lot of the irritation, because you can go, oh, they just see the world differently to me. They start from a different perspective. And that makes it so much easier to have conversations, to prepare conversations, to work together, to play together. It just makes life so much easier when you understand where other people come from.
So with Myers Briggs and personality profiling, is that what we call it? Would you say it's only useful in a work environment?
No, absolutely not. Can I give you an example? Another story. You know me, I love a story. So I was asked to coach a senior executive in an organization that I was working with, and she had come to the session and she had assumed that we would talk about a work scenario. And I said, well, what I like to do as a coach is always start with you. I start with you and your personality. And so we went through, we did her Myers-Briggs profile. And although we were focused primarily on the things that she wanted to achieve at work, she realized that she was getting in her own way at home as well. And the traits that were causing her problems at work were exactly the same traits that were causing her problems at home. And she has been able, over the last couple of years, to completely transform, and these are her words, not mine, completely transform her relationship with her teenage children, with her partner, and her work. So actually, what it did was to completely change the way that she reacted to other people, because she understood herself, but she also had a better understanding of where they may be coming from.
It's all very interesting, isn't it?
It's fascinating.
So, with regards to brilliance, so how do you use profiling to help people to get back to brilliance?
I think an understanding, the first thing is an understanding of themselves. Quite often, when we are naturally good at something, we all have things that we're naturally good at. When we are naturally good at things, we firstly take them for granted, and secondly, because they come easily to us, we don't see them as special. We don't see them as brilliance. And there's a tendency to also think that if I can do it, everybody else can. And that's absolutely not the case. So I was working with somebody just recently who had assumed that her ability to be really detailed and incredibly organized and planful was no big deal. It didn't make her special in the least. And actually, when she talked about it with her colleagues, they were going, it's the thing that we love about you, one of the many things we love about you, because actually we're not naturally good at that. So you have a particular talent that we really love. And she hadn't appreciated at all. So using personality as a starting point to help people understand where their brilliance comes from is the first step. I think also quite often as a culture, particularly in the UK, but it's not the only culture that does this, we're not encouraged, are we, to blow our own trumpets. There's a lot of sayings that certainly I grew up with, things like, oh, pride comes before a fall, and, getting too big for your boots, and all of those kind of things that are designed to stop people from sparkling and to say, do you know, I'm really good at this. This is a talent that I have and I want to share it and I want to make the most of it. It doesn't make me better than anybody else, but it certainly is a talent that I have that maybe not everybody else has. So I think helping people define what brilliance is for them is really important. And it means that people can be uniquely brilliant. So I talk a lot about getting your jewels out in my programs. And if you think about, there are lots of different precious stones. They're different shapes, they're different sizes, they sparkle differently. Pearls have a very different lustre to a diamond. Doesn't make them better or worse, it just makes them different. But they are of equal value in terms of their specialness, if that's a word. And so it's helping people to understand what their unique gift is to the world. And of course, that brings us back beautifully to those conversations about why comparisonitis is such a soul shriveling disease, because it basically buries people's brilliance, comparisonitis.
So, do you think that that's one of the main causes of things that cloud our brilliance?
Yes, I do. I think we're often so busy comparing ourselves with other people, and the pictures that people post on social media aren't always as honest as they might be. Or maybe that's the mask that people are wearing to show to the world, or the wall that they're hiding behind. So I think that often we are buried, or our judgment of ourselves is clouded by comparing ourselves with other people.
Are there any other kind of reasons, do you think, that people's brilliance might become tarnished, would you say?
Well, there's a few. The first one, I think, is about trying to have it all, do it all at the same time. I liken it to having, life is like a banquet, isn't it? And I think that all you can eat buffet, where the temptation is to put everything on your plate at the same time, rather than thinking, actually, I can go back as many times as I like. So I can have a little bit on my plate, and then go back, and then have a bit more and go back, rather than thinking I have to pile it all on at the same time in a great mountain. And when you look at it, you're thinking, well, A, I'm not quite sure where to start with all this. B, I don't actually enjoy it as much as I thought I would. I think I would have enjoyed it more if I had taken my time and gone back over and over again, rather than trying to squash it all onto one plate at the same time. So I think that having it all is a contributing factor. I think also the 100%, you often hear people talk about, we want you to give it 120%. And my immediate response is, percent is out of 100. You cannot have more than 100. And therefore you're setting people up to fail. And if you think about 100, that's 100 in total. If you think about our lives as 100%, 24 hours a day is 100%. So you can't give 100%, because that would mean that you were on it for the whole 24 hours. We do need, as humans, we need to rest. We need to sleep. We need to do all the other things, bodily functions. We need to play. There are so many things we need to fit into that 100%. So to ask anybody to give 100% of themselves 100% of the time is asking for trouble, isn't it, really?
You've just talked about resting. So tell me about how you switch off to switch on. So that's about how you pause so that you can perform at your best in your work and home life.
I am an extrovert, so I get my energy from other people. So the way that I pause is by doing social things, whether that's hanging out in people's gardens, whether it's meeting a friend for a coffee, going for a walk with a friend, pop into the shops for a little girly outing. I like to pause with others. I'm also really mindful that bedtime is really, I love my bed. So I am mindful of bedtimes. So I do have a kind of strict policy, a routine that I try to stick to, where I disconnect from social media, I disconnect from the telly, and I read, or I just relax, but I'm away from others. And I go to bed about 10 o'clock and try to have my lights out by past. It is a little bit of a movable feast, but I do try and stick to that.
Oh, that is good. Now, instead of a policy, I talk to people within the Human Reboot program all about positive sleep hygiene.
Yeah, yes, positive sleep hygiene. That's what it is. A habit. I call it a kind of habit. It's a practice. It's something that, matters to me. I'm aware that I think particularly a lot of people in lockdown, and I was one of them, you'd start to watch something on the television, and then because there was nothing else to do, you'd watch another episode. And before you knew it, it was midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. And I am mindful that a routine helps me keep focused and helps me keep healthy. So although it's a slightly wobbly routine, it does help.
Yeah, that's great. And actually, you've got such a good point about that, because I think there's so many people that have done quite a lot of binge watching through the pandemic. I know I caught myself a couple of times. It was like, oh, I'll just watch another episode. I'll just watch another episode. Yes. And then my husband would be like, we're supposed to be watching this together. He's like, yeah, I know, I'm sorry, but you had to get up early in the morning and I didn't. Well, not as early as you, not 5 or 6 o'clock. So, have you got any personal tips that help you to live life to the full? So, we call it in the Human Reboot your personal flourishing formula for life.
Well, funnily enough, I've got 5, but they're very quick ones. So the first one is focus on what you can do. The second one is we always have a choice, even when it feels like you don't. The third one is you are not alone. There is no shame in asking for help. The fourth one is I practice replacing judgment with curiosity. And lastly, brilliance needs polishing. So get your jewels out regularly. Don't keep those diamonds in a cupboard waiting for best, waiting for a special occasion, because although they sparkle in the dark, nobody gets to see them. So I practice getting my jewels out regularly and letting people see the brilliance.
Oh, that's lovely. So, of those 5, oh, there's a few that I've heard you say before, because obviously we know each other quite well. So, replacing judgment with curiosity. Can you give us a bit of an example of what you mean by that?
I can. So, when you're looking at somebody, I'll give you a real life example. So, I was walking and I passed a lady who was driving in a car. She had child seats in the back and obviously was a mum of young children. And she was driving quite fast and she was smoking. And with my judgment hat on, I would have said, huh, she's got children in the car and she's smoking. Doesn't she know that smoking damages, children's health and her own health? Curiosity is, I wonder how her day's going. She might, the children weren't in the car. She did have the window open. And actually, maybe she is having a really, really tough day. And maybe she's driving fast with a cigarette in her hand. Maybe she's going to get help. Maybe she's going for support. I have no idea what's going on in her life, but maybe she's doing the best that she can right now. And it's not, I don't know what's going on. So rather than judging and thinking, gosh, she's a terrible mother or a terrible person, what does she think she's doing? Being curious about, what's going on in her life.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And the point about you're not on your own, and reach out for and ask for help. Where did that one come from? Is that something that kind of you've learned in your own kit bag along the way?
Yes, absolutely. It goes back to that, sitting on the floor of the Scottish cottage with my life in pieces and thinking, wow, this, and you do when you're in the bottom of a deep hole, when your life as you know it has fallen to pieces, you do feel very alone. And there were days when I just wanted to shut myself in a cupboard and not come out because it was hard. And it was hard putting a mask on and, doing the things that I knew I had to do. And it was absolutely the kindness of friends that helped me through. And I think it's always hard to be vulnerable, isn't it? Because we think that people will judge us and that they will think, well, you should have done this or you should have done that, or why didn't you see that coming, or all of those things. But actually, 99.9% of the time, people were incredibly helpful and kind and supportive. And one of the things I realized fairly early on was that I had lost the ability to ask for what I wanted or what I needed, because I had been so busy looking after everybody else that I had lost Jenny in the process. So when somebody asked me what I wanted, I didn't know. I didn't know how to ask, and I didn't know what. So that was quite a shock to realize that I found myself in that position. And it took me a long time to learn to receive, because I was very good at giving. I wasn't quite so good at receiving because I didn't know how.
It's a really interesting point, Jenny, really interesting, because that really resonates with me. When you're a mum and you're investing in your work, you're giving back to other people. And, in my previous life, that's where kind of a wrong path that I took, in terms of perhaps giving a little bit too much. I still love to give. That's just, that's me. But I suppose it's knowing your boundaries around that, and knowing when, enough's enough, and how much you can kind of take on, what's realistic. And I suppose a little bit like you say with your banquet.
Absolutely. And I also think there's it's when you say asking for what you need, sometimes, and this is back to personalities again, sometimes other different personalities will have a different way of approaching support. So some people will immediately want to take your problem, fix it, and give it you back. Some people will want to kind of listen and explore it and ask you loads of questions. There are lots of different ways, aren't there, of people supporting. And so one of the things that I learned that was so valuable and that I practice today is saying, if I'm asking for support, I'll say, what I'd like you to do is to just listen. I need somebody to listen while I talk it through out loud, or rather than, I want you to fix it for me. I don't need you to fix me. I just need you to listen. Or actually, I've got this really, technical issues, and I'd like you to fix it. So I think what was really helpful for me was understanding the different kinds of support that might be available, and being clear about asking, which was a huge deal for me, asking for the kind of support that was most helpful for me at that time. And I guess that fits again with what you said about boundaries. It was about saying, this is what I need. Sometimes you just need a hug. You don't need somebody to fix the problem for you. You just need a hug and somebody to say, it'll be all right.
Yeah. And that the part that is really interesting, that you said, I had to learn to receive. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, Jenny? Because I think that could resonate massively with so many people, when sometimes we forget to look after ourselves. So how do we learn to receive?
I think it starts with first an acknowledgement that the giving and receiving is out of balance. And I have a sign. So if you turn both of your palms upwards, then it's all about giving. But actually, one of your hands should be turned the other way. So I have a mental picture in my head of one upturned palm and one downturned, and that reminds me of the balance of giving and receiving. And in practical terms, it can be as simple as accepting a compliment. How many times have we, and I'm as guilty as anybody else, how many times has somebody paid you a compliment and you've kind of batted it back? You've gone, oh, this old thing, at something in the cupboard, or no, I don't look good, or oh, oh, don't say that, or it's an old thing. So we kind of, if somebody pays us a compliment, we bat it back. And I've realized that's the first step to receiving, is when somebody pays you a compliment, rather than saying, oh no, this old thing, you say, thank you. Just thank you. If it feels harder to say anything else, just say thank you. That was the first step for me. The second step was around accepting. So when people said, would you like me to have the boys for the afternoon, so that you can do something else, rather than saying, no, I can manage, it's okay, and rushing around desperately, trying to fit everything in and staying up till midnight trying to sort things out. Just saying, do you know that, thank you, that would be so helpful. So when people offer help, rather than feeling that you have to, back to the buffet, do it all, be all, everything, and people will think that you are less than efficient if you say, actually, I could just do with a bit of help. I think that is so important. And it is an intentional practice. And even now, occasionally, when somebody says, would you like me to do that for you? I'm tempted to say, no, it's fine, I can manage. And I think the thing is to notice the pattern. If you notice that pattern of you going, no, it's fine, I catch myself before I go, no, it's fine. And I go, would that help me? And if it does, I say, thank you. Thank you very much. The final thing is I realize that I am much better at asking for help because I'm not attached to the outcome. So I kind of say to people, is it okay for me to ask? It's as okay for me to ask as it is for you to say no if you can't. So I think there's a clarity around, I'm asking, but you are equally at liberty to say if you can't, and neither of us will be offended by that. So I think the way that you clarify those conversations with your friends, and probably harder to do with your family sometimes, but those kind of responses are really important. So I feel much better about asking people I know for help, because I also know that they feel happy to be able to say if they can't, so that we have a really clear understanding.
Very good. Is there anybody or any community or any books or anything that's really been a real key contributor of your journey?
Oh, there's so many. I'm a really avid reader. I love books, and actually I have got piles of books that I have read and reread, and then I've got piles of books that I am yet to read. So I think Brené Brown is a real inspiration to me. I love her vulnerability and her podcasts. I just love everything about her and the way she speaks. I have spent a lot of time looking at authors who write about leadership. So people like Simon Sinek and John Maxwell. There's lots of people who work in the leadership space. And I love the writing of Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who talks about cultural archetypes, and she talks about women primarily, wild women and dangerous old crones, and late bloomers, and all of her work resonates hugely with me. She wrote a book called Women Who Run with the Wolves, and she has such wisdom and such an eloquent way of writing. So if you haven't come across her, she is definitely somebody I would recommend.
Oh, thank you so much, Jenny. I have absolutely loved having you today. Now, if anyone would like to learn more about you or want to connect with you and get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can connect with me on Instagram. They can connect with me on LinkedIn. Genuine Consulting has a Facebook page. And then there is my website, which is genuineconsulting.com.
And we'll put that spelling in the show notes as well. So thank you, Jenny, for being as brilliant as ever. I've loved it.
Thank you for having me, Emma, as ever. I love our conversations, and I hope this is the first of many. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Human Reboot podcast. I'm Emma Last, and if you've enjoyed this episode, please leave me a 5-star podcast review and visit thehumanrebootmovement.com, where you can find downloadable free resources, sign up to my mailing list, or connect with me on social. So that